Great to have you with us on the show today, Reginald. Now, as we just mentioned, IMF MD Georgieva, she's warning that the world is facing pretty much its biggest test since the Second World War. Now, according to global finance chiefs discussing at the Davos, they're placing all the blame squarely on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and that's the blame for the current inflation shock globally. Do you agree with that assessment? Are there other factors that are fueling this rise in the cost of living globally?
Russia-Ukraine crisis became a convenient excuse for what was actually happening, what was going to happen anyway, or something that had already started, which is the global inflationary pressures that we are seeing. Basic economics would have told these finance chiefs that if you create a nominal money supply or you increase the amount of money in circulation through what they did during the COVID period in the name of supporting households during COVID and creating money from thin air, what that does, especially in an environment where prices are sticky, that means prices don't react as fast to increase in money supply when the demand for that money is not equivalent. So what we are seeing now is prices reacting to an excessive demand to goods because of the money supply that was created by these central banks and the Western governments during this period. So when prices become sticky, you realize their interest rates fell down and their currencies appreciated, which was the short-term effect of a money supply increase. So the period we're in now is a transitionary period where there's excessive demand on goods. So prices have to start raising up and interest rates will go up with it. And that's why you're seeing interest rates also going up or globally. So for them to blame Russia-Ukraine crisis is them trying to divert attention from the policy failures or miscalculations that they actually did. The Russia-Ukraine crisis has caused a supply chain problem of food inflation, but what the world is suffering from is more of monetary inflation and very little of food inflation.
Well, it is interesting you say that because, as you said, food prices, they've been particularly worse hit. And some of the experts are saying that food, it could be the wild card when we talk about a recovery or a recession going forward. You talked about supply chain problems that the Russia-Ukraine crisis has caused. Given that we're now seeing them mulling over further sanctions, could we be heading into a more turbulent period given the situation with food prices?
Yes, definitely. Apart from the food prices or food crisis that we're going to face, because I'll give you an example of a country called Egypt, which imports close to 12 million tons of wheat, and 70% of that comes from Russia and Ukraine. And bread is their staple food. So all of a sudden, the price of the most basic of commodities in Egypt is skyrocketing. And they have no other place of actually being able to get this wheat, because you can't just wake up and say, okay, Britain will now start planting wheat and we will export the wheat. It is a process. So that's going to have a hunger crisis that's going to go with it. But because of the rising monetary inflation, which has been forcing now the central banks to increase interest rates, when interest rates go up, that's now a sign of that we are going to go into more of a recession, maybe not a depression, but a recession, because without access to money, which now is becoming expensive, economies will just cool down. And the problem is that the economies already coming out of COVID have not fully recovered, and they've been hit by high interest rates. We are actually about to see a global economic recession, which will, yes, amplify the hunger problems that are going to be faced mostly by African countries.
Well, of course, in light of this, all eyes are now on central banks who, of course, are expected to come up with clear trajectories on how they'll use their tools to stabilize the economy and also stem inflation. We're seeing, especially a lot of them on the continent, as well as globally, tightening policy. The IMF is also calling on governments to lower their trade barriers going forward. So what are the expectations? Do you think we'll see a prolonged period of these actions? How much pressure is this, of course, putting on countries that are highly indebted?
So to expect the same culprits that caused the problem that we are facing to fix it is a bit foolhardy for any policymaker. We are in this problem because of central banks who decided to defy the laws of economics. The only tool that they have, or all their tools, or the tools of a central bank, control money supply or try to stimulate money demand. Because of inflation, they are caught in a rock and a hard place because they have to increase interest rate to try and cool down inflation. By increasing interest rates, you are further reducing that demand for money, which will have a ripple effect in prices going back up. For countries who are highly in debt, inflation is good because then you get to repay your debt cheaper. So you either inflate your debt away, so to speak, because then you are repaying, if it's $1 billion, you are repaying $1 billion with cheaper $1 billion because the currencies will lose value as we go along. So for the people that have borrowed, inflation is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. But for the guys who lent money, inflation is a bad thing because then you're getting cheap money or useless money repaying your nominal debt figure. So countries that are suffering hyperinflation and they're highly indebted, they should be happy. They should actually use this period to try and clear most of their loans using this devalued piece of paper, which we call currency.
Well, then, what then is your outlook going forward? Because if you look across developing markets, emerging markets, everyone is hurting right now. So as we're watching the world seemingly sliding towards recession, what is the picture for Africa? What's your outlook?
Africa has another kind of married of problems. One, because we don't trade amongst ourselves, we start suffering from these supply shocks. So we end up having imported inflation. I gave you the example of Egypt, where the prices of food have gone up. The prices of energy are also going up because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And the ripple effects that will do to the continent is to slow down any form of growth that we were seeing on the continent. Because if you look historically, if you look at 2008, 2009, when there was the global credit crisis, Africa suffered the most because of exogenous shocks. Because our economies are so weak and so highly dependent on the external, or especially the Western side, as they say, when they sneeze, we are the ones who actually catch the cold. So it is a time for policymakers in Africa to actually start thinking of how do we, look internally to sustain job creation, to sustain macroeconomic fundamentals. That means maintain stability of currencies, maintain inflation at reasonable levels, so that then we do not destroy ourselves because of poor policy choices over the years, where we are so heavily dependent on raw material exports. If the world cools down, they demand less copper. They'll demand less tea. They'll demand less coffee. If Europe is suffering, they will not demand less flowers. And you find African exports suffer, incomes suffer, and we actually end up getting the bad side of the stick in all this mess.
Quite right. Well, as always, we thank you so much, Mr. Kadzutu, for your great insights. That, of course, is Reginald Kadzutu, the CEO of Amana Capital, joining us there.